The base gate echoed with shouting, "Get her out! She doesn't belong here!" A brown-haired woman was pushed through the entrance, dozens of contemptuous eyes following her every step. She carried only a small bag, walking silently through the humiliation. Hours later, during a joint training exercise, the loudspeaker announced a call sign. When the SEALs heard it, they snapped to attention and raised their hands in perfect salute. The woman they had just expelled was the legend who owned their very lives. At Naval Base Coronado, Staff Sergeant Reina Vasquez existed in the margins of military life, invisible to most and dismissed by the rest. At 30, with long brown hair always pulled back in a simple ponytail and a slight frame that seemed fragile against the backdrop of elite military personnel, she worked as a temporary logistics coordinator, a role that placed her firmly outside the warrior culture that defined the base's identity. Her official designation was civilian contractor support, but to the Navy personnel and Marines who encountered her daily, she was simply the help, someone who processed paperwork, organized supply requests, and performed the administrative tasks that kept operations running but never commanded respect. "What's she even doing here?" Lieutenant Morrison asked his colleague Rodriguez as they watched Reina quietly organizing medical supplies in the quartermaster's storage area. "This is a military installation, not a temp agency." Rodriguez shrugged with the casual indifference of someone discussing furniture placement. "Command probably needed someone to handle the boring stuff so real military personnel can focus on important work. At least she stays out of the way." The dismissal wasn't personal, it was systematic. In an environment where respect was earned through demonstrated combat capability, physical prowess, and military rank, Reina occupied the lowest possible position. She wore no uniform insignia, carried no weapons, and participated in no training exercises that would establish her credibility among warriors. Captain Stevens, the base administrative officer, had made his position clear during her initial briefing. "Your job is to process requests, maintain records, and support operations without interfering with actual military personnel. These men are professionals who don't need civilians getting in their way." What none of them saw were the small acts of service that distinguished Reina's character from her official role. When young Marines struggled with complex supply requisitions, she spent extra time helping them navigate bureaucratic procedures that could delay critical equipment. When sailors worked double shifts loading aircraft, she quietly brought coffee and sandwiches, understanding the exhaustion that came with demanding physical labor. Staff Sergeant Williams, a grizzled veteran who supervised equipment maintenance, noticed her attention to detail when processing his requests. "She actually reads what we need instead of just rubber stamping forms," he told his assistant. "Takes time to understand why we're asking for specific items. Most administrators just push paper." When Petty Officer Chen struggled with a family emergency that required complex leave documentation, Reina stayed after hours to help him complete the paperwork correctly, ensuring he could attend his father's funeral without complications. "You didn't have to do that," Chen had said, grateful but surprised by assistance from someone who wasn't even military personnel. "Everyone deserves to be with family when it matters," Reina replied quietly, her response revealing depths of understanding that suggested personal experience with loss. But kindness without military credentials earned tolerance rather than respect in an environment that valued warrior culture above all else. Her workspace was organized with precision that exceeded military standards. Every form alphabetized, every request tracked systematically, every deadline met without exception. Her knowledge of military logistics was encyclopedic, her understanding of supply chains comprehensive, and her efficiency remarkable. Hidden in her desk drawer, wrapped carefully in soft cloth and secured with a small lock, was a silver identification card that seemed out of place among routine administrative supplies. The inscription read, "Silent Hawk, Kraken Unit, Combat Pilot." Master Sergeant Davis, who had been observing military personnel for 2 decades, occasionally noticed details that others missed. He watched Raina move through the base with spatial awareness that seemed unnecessary for someone whose job involved sitting behind a desk. Noticed how she instinctively positioned herself with clear sightlines to exits and entrances. Observed how she seemed to catalog aircraft types and numbers with unconscious precision. "There's something about that contractor," he mentioned to his platoon sergeant one afternoon. "The way she carries herself, like she's done more than process paperwork." Petty Officer Chen. "When I saw her touch that silver card in her desk, her eyes got red. I thought it was just some memento. Now I understand it was history itself." The crisis began with what should have been a routine administrative review. At 8:30 hours on a Tuesday that would reshape everyone's understanding of judgment and value, Captain Stevens called an unexpected meeting in the main conference room. The gathering included department heads, senior enlisted personnel, and several officers who had been fielding complaints about civilian contractors on the base. "We need to address a personnel issue," Stevens announced, his tone carrying the weight of administrative decision-making. "There have been multiple reports about inappropriate civilian presence in sensitive areas of the base." The reports, as they were presented, painted a picture of overreach and presumption. Raina had been observed in aircraft maintenance areas without specific authorization. She had been seen reviewing flight schedules that weren't part of her administrative responsibilities. She had asked technical questions about helicopter capabilities that seemed beyond her need to know. "Sir, she's been asking about Apache specifications," Sergeant Martinez reported. "Want to know about weapon systems, flight performance, maintenance requirements." "That's not logistics support, that's intelligence gathering." Lieutenant Morrison added his perspective. "She watches flight operations like she's studying them. Makes notes about aircraft movements, pilot rotations, mission planning. It's inappropriate for a civilian contractor." The accusations created a narrative of suspicious behavior that transformed professional competence into potential security concerns. Her attention to detail became surveillance. Her technical knowledge became espionage. Her genuine interest in supporting military operations became presumptuous overreach. Furthermore, Stevens continued, "Several personnel have complained that she acts like she belongs here rather than understanding her position as temporary support staff. This kind of attitude is disruptive to good order and discipline." The decision was unanimous among the assembled leadership. Raina Vasquez needed to be removed from the base immediately. At 10:47 hours, 2 military police escorts appeared at her workstation. The termination process was public, deliberate, and designed to send a message about the consequences of overstepping civilian boundaries in military environments. "Ma'am, you need to gather your personal belongings and leave the base immediately," the senior MP announced, his voice carrying official authority that drew attention from everyone in the administrative area. Raina looked up from the supply requisition she had been processing, an urgent request for medical equipment that a deployed unit needed within 72 hours. "Can I finish this request? The Marines in Kandahar need these supplies for their mission." "Negative, ma'am. You need to leave now." As she gathered her few personal items, a coffee mug, a small photo, and the silver card from her desk drawer, dozens of military personnel gathered to witness her removal. Some watched with satisfaction, seeing vindication of their complaints. Others observed with curiosity, wondering what had prompted such dramatic action. "Good riddance," Lieutenant Morrison said to his companion. "Maybe now we can get back to focusing on real military business without civilians trying to play soldier." The walk to the base gate was conducted in silence, but every step was observed by personnel who saw her removal as confirmation that the military had corrected an administrative error. She didn't belong there, and justice had been served. But Master Sergeant Davis, who had been watching from the maintenance hangar, noticed something that others missed. As Raina passed his position, a gust of wind caused her jacket to open slightly, revealing the silver card she carried. The reflection caught his eye, and for just a moment, he read the inscription, "Silent Hawk, Kraken Unit." Davis felt ice water run through his veins. He had served in Afghanistan from 2018 to 2020, supporting special operations aviation missions that officially didn't exist. He had heard whispered stories about Kraken unit pilots whose capabilities exceeded normal human limitations. He knew what Silent Hawk represented among those who had been there. Jesus Christ, he whispered to himself, understanding dawning with horrifying clarity. At 13:47 hours, as Raina disappeared through the base gate carrying her single bag, the loudspeaker crackled to life with a message that would change everything. Silent Hawk, report to operations immediately for emergency mission briefing. The announcement echoed across the base, reaching every barracks, every hangar, every administrative building where personnel had witnessed her removal less than 3 hours earlier. The effect was immediate and electric. Every SEAL on the base stopped what they were doing. Every special operations pilot froze mid-conversation. Every veteran of Middle Eastern deployments felt recognition hit them like a physical blow. Did they just call Silent Hawk? Petty Officer Rodriguez asked his teammate, his voice carrying disbelief. That's impossible, his companion replied. Silent Hawk died in Syria 3 years ago. Helicopter went down with all hands. But Master Sergeant Davis was already running toward the base gate, understanding with crystal clarity that they had just expelled the most decorated combat pilot in special operations history. The woman they had dismissed as an overreaching civilian contractor was the legend whose missions had saved hundreds of American lives. The base that had thrown her out in shame was about to learn that heroes sometimes hide in plain sight, waiting for someone to recognize that administrative competence might mask extraordinary capabilities earned through service in places most people couldn't imagine. Master Sergeant Davis. When I heard that call sign over the loudspeaker, my blood ran cold, because there was only one person in the world who carried that name, the pilot who once saved my entire company. The helicopter that landed on the base tarmac at 13:55 hours wasn't scheduled, wasn't expected, and carried passengers whose presence would fundamentally alter how everyone understood what had just transpired. Commander Jake Sullivan stepped from the aircraft with the purposeful stride of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected life and death. Behind him emerged 6 Navy SEALs in full combat gear, their faces carrying the grim intensity of operators who had been pulled from active missions for reasons they considered critically important. "Where is Silent Hawk?" Commander Sullivan's voice carried across the tarmac with absolute authority. The question hit the assembled base personnel like artillery fire. Silent Hawk, the call sign they had just heard announced over the loudspeaker, was apparently not just a legend or a mistake, but an active participant in whatever crisis had brought special operations personnel to their base unannounced. Captain Stevens, still processing the implications of the morning's events, approached the commander with obvious confusion. "Sir, I think there's been some misunderstanding. We don't have anyone assigned here by that call sign." Sullivan's expression shifted from urgency to disbelief, then to something approaching anger. Silent Hawk was assigned to this base for logistics coordination pending reactivation. Where is Captain Rebecca Vasquez? The name hit Stevens like a physical blow. Rebecca Vasquez, the civilian contractor they had just expelled for inappropriate behavior, was apparently not a civilian at all, but a military officer whose presence at their base had been authorized at levels far above his clearance. "Sir," Stevens said carefully, his voice carrying the first hints of understanding that he had made a catastrophic error. "If you're referring to the logistics contractor, she was removed from the base this morning for security concerns." The silence that followed was deafening. Commander Sullivan stared at Stevens with the expression of someone processing information that violated everything he thought he understood about military competence and judgment. "You removed Silent Hawk from the base?" Sullivan's voice carried disbelief that bordered on horror. "Do you have any idea who you just expelled?" Before Stevens could respond, Master Sergeant Davis approached the group with information that would provide context for the disaster they had just witnessed. "Sir, I believe Captain Vasquez left through the main gate approximately 3 hours ago. She was escorted off base by military police after an administrative review determined she was overstepping her civilian contractor authority. Sullivan turned to his SEAL team with an expression that suggested he was reconsidering his faith in military intelligence and administrative competence. "Gentlemen," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of someone about to deliver information that would reshape how everyone present understood heroism, sacrifice, and the difference between appearance and reality. "Let me tell you about Silent Hawk." What followed was a briefing that belonged in classified historical archives rather than a routine-based tarmac. Captain Rebecca Silent Hawk Vasquez, United States Army, Special Operations Aviation Command, Kraken Unit, 3 deployments to Afghanistan, 2 to Syria, countless classified missions throughout the Middle East and North Africa. The assembled personnel listened in stunned silence as Sullivan provided details that transformed their understanding of the woman they had just humiliated and expelled. Single-pilot missions into hostile territory to extract wounded special operations personnel. Night infiltration flights through enemy air defenses that other pilots considered impossible. Combat search and rescue operations that officially never happened because the missions themselves were too classified to acknowledge. Stevens felt his career dissolving as he understood the magnitude of his misjudgment, but Sullivan wasn't finished. Ramadi, 2019. Taliban forces shot down 3 American helicopters, leaving 17 wounded special operations personnel trapped in enemy territory with no possibility of conventional extraction. Silent Hawk flew a solo mission through surface-to-air missile fields, landed in the middle of a firefight, and extracted all 17 casualties in 3 separate trips. Master Sergeant Davis, who had been part of that operation, stepped forward with tears in his eyes. "Sir, I was one of those 17. She came back for us 3 times, taking fire every approach and departure. We called her the Angel of Ramadi." The revelation hit the base like a shockwave. The woman they had dismissed as an inappropriate civilian contractor was the pilot whose extraordinary courage had saved the lives of men who were standing among them at that very moment. Total confirmed saves. 72 American personnel extracted from situations where extraction was considered impossible. 0 casualties during any Silent Hawk rescue operation. 0. Commander Sullivan looked around at the faces of personnel who were beginning to understand they had participated in something that violated every principle of military honor and respect. She was officially killed in action 18 months ago when her helicopter was shot down over Syria. Her survival was classified, her recovery was classified, and her assignment to this base was part of a transition program for special operations personnel adjusting to conventional military roles. The implications were staggering. They hadn't just expelled a civilian contractor who was overstepping her authority. They had humiliated a decorated combat veteran whose service record exceeded the combined achievements of everyone who had complained about her presence. At that moment, a taxi pulled up to the base gate, and Reina Vasquez stepped out, carrying the same small bag she had left with 3 hours earlier. Her return was prompted not by vindication or anger, but by the emergency call sign that had summoned her back to service regardless of how she had been treated. As she walked across the tarmac toward the waiting helicopter, every SEAL present snapped to attention and rendered the most precise military salute that Coronado had witnessed in years. The contrast was profound and humbling. The woman they had thrown off base in shame was returning to answer a call to serve personnel who needed her extraordinary capabilities, regardless of how they had been treated or what recognition she received. "Captain Vasquez," Commander Sullivan said formally, "we have 17 Marines trapped in hostile territory. Conventional extraction is impossible. We need Silent Hawk." Her response was delivered with the quiet professionalism that had defined her entire career. "When do we launch, sir?" She didn't ask for apologies from those who had expelled her. She didn't demand explanations from those who had questioned her character. She simply prepared to risk her life once again for people who had failed to recognize her value until they needed her extraordinary abilities. Captain Stevens, Master Sergeant Davis, and every other military professional present understood they had witnessed something that would haunt their careers. The moment they learned that heroism often hides behind humility, and that judging people by appearances rather than character can blind you to the legend standing right beside you. If you believe that shame can be transformed into honor when truth finally emerges, type "I owe a debt" in the comments below. The mission launched at 14:30 hours with Silent Hawk at the controls of an MH-60 Black Hawk helicopter, flying into hostile territory to extract 17 Marines whose position had been overrun by enemy forces. By 16:47 hours, she had returned with all 17 casualties, having performed 3 separate insertions under fire to ensure no American personnel were left behind. The mission's success added to her legend while simultaneously highlighting the moral failure of those who had expelled her hours earlier. But Reina Vasquez didn't return to Naval Base Coronado seeking vindication or apologies. Instead, she quietly resumed her position as logistics coordinator, processing supply requests and maintaining administrative records, as if the morning's humiliation and afternoon's heroics were simply part of a normal working day. The transformation in how base personnel viewed her was immediate and profound, but it was expressed through the kind of respect that military culture reserves for warriors whose service transcends normal comprehension. Her workspace was relocated to a position of honor rather than hidden in administrative corners. Coffee appeared on her desk without her requesting it. Young Marines and sailors began approaching her not for logistics support, but for advice about service, sacrifice, and what it meant to carry responsibility for others' lives. "Ma'am," Petty Officer Chen asked during a quiet moment, "how do you handle it, knowing that people's lives depend on decisions you make?" Her answer revealed the philosophy that had sustained her through years of impossible missions. "You remember that service isn't about being recognized or appreciated. It's about being available when people need you, regardless of how they treat you when they don't." The most meaningful change was the development of what became known as the Silent Hawk Standard, an unofficial code of conduct that reminded everyone to look beyond surface appearances when evaluating others' worth and capabilities. No one at Coronado would ever again dismiss someone based solely on their current role or apparent status. They had learned that extraordinary people often choose ordinary positions, that heroes frequently hide behind humility, and that the most valuable individuals might be those who serve without seeking recognition. 3 weeks after the incident, Captain Stevens received orders transferring him to a position where his administrative skills could be better utilized, specifically managing supply chains far from personnel decisions that affected operational capability. Master Sergeant Davis, who had recognized Reina's identity, was assigned as her military liaison, ensuring that future communications about special operations personnel would be handled by someone who understood the difference between classification requirements and personnel management. But the most significant change was invisible, a shift in base culture that honored quiet service over loud self-promotion, that valued competence over credentials, and that recognized that some people's contributions couldn't be measured by conventional military standards. Reina continued flying rescue missions when called upon, but returned each time to her desk, her supply requests, and her administrative responsibilities. She had found peace in work that allowed her to serve without the weight of constant life-or-death decisions, while remaining available for situations that required her extraordinary abilities. 6 months later, she received a package containing letters from the families of the 72 service members she had saved during her active special operations career. The letters thanked not just Silent Hawk the pilot, but Reina Vasquez, the person who had chosen to continue serving even after being treated with disrespect and dismissal. One letter, from the wife of a Marine she had extracted from Ramadi, captured the sentiment that defined her quiet heroism. "You didn't just save his life, you saved our family's future. Thank you for answering the call, no matter how people treated you before they understood who you really were." Type "I will live with honor" if you believe that true heroes serve others regardless of recognition or respect. This story isn't just about a misidentified military contractor. It's about the dangerous assumptions we make about people based on their current circumstances, rather than their full history, capabilities, and character. Every workplace, every community, every social environment contains people whose past experiences, specialized skills, and personal achievements remain invisible beneath their present roles. The quiet employee processing paperwork might be a former executive who chose simpler work for personal reasons. The soft-spoken maintenance worker might be a decorated veteran carrying experiences most people couldn't imagine. The humble service provider might possess expertise that would astound you if circumstances revealed it. We live in a culture that judges worth through immediate visibility, current titles, and obvious status markers. We assume that important people announce themselves with impressive credentials, that valuable individuals occupy prestigious positions, and that those in supporting roles are there because they lack the capability for greater responsibility. But the truth is that many of our most capable people have moved beyond the need for external validation. They've learned that real fulfillment comes from meaningful work rather than impressive titles, that genuine service matters more than public recognition, and that personal peace often requires stepping away from roles that demand constant performance of greatness. Raina's story represents countless individuals who possess extraordinary qualifications but choose ordinary positions because they value contribution over recognition, service over status, and peace over prestige. They stock shelves in retail stores while holding advanced degrees. They answer phones in call centers despite having led major projects. They perform routine maintenance while carrying skills that could revolutionize entire industries. These choices aren't failures or limitations. They're conscious decisions made by people who have learned that your job title doesn't define your worth, that helping others matters more than impressing them, and that sometimes the most important work happens in roles that society undervalues. The tragedy is that we often dismiss these people, missing opportunities to learn from individuals whose experiences and insights could enrich our understanding of resilience, service, and what truly matters in life. Moreover, our tendency to judge based on appearances rather than character can lead us to treat extraordinary people with disrespect, dismissal, or even cruelty, simply because their current circumstances don't match our expectations of how impressive people should present themselves. The next time you encounter someone in what appears to be a humble position, remember Silent Hawk's story. Consider that this person might have chosen their role carefully, that their current work might represent wisdom rather than limitation, and that their quiet competence might mask experiences and capabilities that would humble you if you knew their full story. Don't mistake humility for inadequacy. Don't confuse service orientation with lack of ambition. Don't assume that those who work behind the scenes lack the ability to take center stage. Sometimes the most powerful people in the room are those who have chosen to use their strength in service of others rather than promotion of themselves. Sometimes the greatest heroes are hiding in plain sight, waiting not for recognition, but for moments when their extraordinary abilities are truly needed. If you believe in treating everyone with dignity regardless of their apparent status, leave a comment and don't forget to subscribe to The Veteran's Story. We tell the stories that shouldn't be forgotten. Real people are creating and telling stories, not mass-produced AI.